Why is the district at such risk from speculative development?
Because we don't have a proper, robust local plan. Because the one that they were working on, the inspector didn't like so many aspects of it and required changes, they decided to withdraw it. And so we're back to the old 2015 one, which doesn't really have a lot of teeth. And it means that there's no clear policy framework against which to assess the applications, which means the developers can effectively have a field day. And it's compounded by things like today's decision over Kennet, where the council paper said it will impact on ecology, it will impact on archaeology, historic environment, it will impact on transport, traffic, residential amenity, noise. They listed a whole load of things it would impact on and then said, but we need the houses, so we'll have the 500 houses, and the councillors have approved it. So it was against various policies, and yet they've approved it. And then the killer to me is, as you say, affordable homes. There should be 40% affordable homes in the south of the district on any development, and they've agreed that this one can have only 30%. Why? It's a council development. Surely a council development, as community land trust, if anything, should deliver more than the minimum requirement, not less than the minimum requirement. And part of the reason the inspector didn't like the local plan was these community land trusts. We had one in Swaffham Prior. It was a real community land trust. The community decided that they needed more housing, and they decided the mix, they decided where, they decided the allocation of the social housing, so it came up from the community, it was delivered by the community, for the community. That's what a community land trust is supposed to be. But how East Cambs have been using them is a backdoor way to get planning permission on sites that otherwise wouldn't get it, and do effectively a commercial development. And frankly, it looks like that's what's going on at Kennet. There is a community land trust, it's properly registered, but most of the residents of Kennet, most of the local community, don't support it. That's not the spirit of a community land trust. And I think that's one of the reasons why the inspector didn't like the local plan, because she could see that the community land trusts were being misused.
Thanks for that, Charlotte. That's a great answer. So, Mark, a local plan, for people who don't follow housing policy and, frankly, district council affairs so closely, can you just explain what a local plan actually sets out?
So, a local plan, fundamentally, it's determining land use in the district. So you're identifying areas you want to protect. There may be, for a whole host of reasons, maybe areas that you don't want to develop. It's looking at where you do want to have development, the sort of development you have, and looking along with that, the sort of infrastructure you have, whether it's community facilities, so that you don't end up with vast housing estates without those facilities. It's looking at the transport links that go with that as well. And I think we've already talked about some of the problems with transport in East Cambridgeshire. So it's bringing all of those together in a way, in a thought through way that links together. And the problem when you don't have a local plan is that all of that falls by the wayside, because you've just got developers coming in looking to build and maximise their return by building as many houses as possible.
So it's important that we recognise that a local plan isn't NIMBYism. A local plan recognises a need for housing, but sets out where that housing should be appropriately sited, and for 5 years, I believe?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so it's a 5-year supply. In the absence of a local plan that can evidence 5-year supply of housing, it's for free for all for developers, is what you're telling me, yeah?
Yes.
There is one exception, and that's if you have a neighbourhood plan. So that's something that I've been very heavily involved in Sutton, is we have created a neighbourhood plan over the last 4 or 5 years, and that actually goes to referendum on the 2nd of May as well. So the parish of Sutton will vote on a neighbourhood plan that will cover the development within the Sutton parish. And that does identify the sort of housing that people want to see in the village, in the areas that they want to see that development, and that does provide that sort of protection. But outside of Sutton, where hopefully that plan is adopted on the 2nd of May, and Fordham, which already has a neighbourhood plan, that isn't something that any of the other villages have been able to get to at that point. It's certainly something we want to encourage, and I think it's something that Liberal Democrats on the district council would push forward, because it's a way of local communities getting more involved in those decisions that are going to affect them, rather than planning being just a few councillors in a room in Ely sort of making a decision and having to be bussed around the district to work out what the site looks like that they're making a decision on. And along with that, the other thing that we want to do on the district is to have area planning committees. So again, rather than having a group of councillors together in Ely making a decision about Burwell or Bottisham or some other part of the district that perhaps they don't know, is getting the councillors in the local area to make that decision. It's been used elsewhere in a number of councils around the country, and it brings the council much closer to the people that they're there to represent.
It also means that the people who want to go and make their case to the council don't have to get into Ely and sit maybe through a 3 or 4 hour meeting for their 5-minute slot. They'll have a meeting that's closer to them and won't be covering as many issues, so it'll be a shorter meeting. So it'll be much more practicable for people to actually come and put their case.
Yeah, I should declare an interest at this point. I did until last month sit on the steering group of the Witchford Neighbourhood Plan Committee. Yeah, so we held the meetings quite late at night so people who work elsewhere could get back and take part in that and as you say, take part in that whole set of activity then. So there's no local plan in place now in East Cams. Now that's odd, isn't it?
There's the 2015 one.
In reality, the demographic of our region, the economy of our region has changed a lot in the last 4 years.
Yes,
so the chance
but legally
plan,
there is one.
Yeah, but the chance of a plan from 2015 holding much water now is slim to remote. Okay. Yeah. The current council has been unable to get a local plan past an inspector. 36 out of 39 councillors. The solution you're saying is probably not more Conservative councillors, is it?
The solution,
soft question for you.
the solution is councillors who are going to consult properly and work with local communities. We do need the housing. So that's the first thing, is to be honest about the housing, the type of housing, and work with local communities about where we're going to put that housing and what sort of infrastructure needs to go along with it. And neighbourhood plans, I think, are a really critical part of building this up, so that you hear from the parishes what it is they want, and then you build that in to your local plan, which also has to reflect national policies. But you then have a local plan that is robust, that really represents what the community wants, and will stand up to the inspector, because you'll have good, strong policies that you can back up with evidence. I think the local plan that they took to the inspector previously had a lot of problems with it. Obviously, it had the community land trust problem. It didn't have enough housing supply in it. That was another problem. And then I think the other weakness to it was for each village it has a section, and that's supposed to be about that village. And she didn't like those. The inspector didn't like those, and I think the reason she didn't, we were quite disappointed in Reach, because we had about a third of the village turn up to discuss the local plan, and between us we drafted what we wanted in that section about Reach, and we sent it in, and we got the first draft back and it wasn't in, and we got no explanation of why it wasn't in. And so we sent it back again, and the second draft, still it wasn't in. It never got in, and we never got an explanation of why. We kept it short. It wasn't pages and pages, because they'd made it clear it was a side of A4, so we'd kept within that. And when we read them, there was a certain generic pattern. The small villages had one sort of description with a little few sentences that were specific to them, medium villages likewise. So I think what she was saying is not you can't have a proper vision for each village. I think she was saying these aren't proper visions for each village, because basically the Conservative councillors had ignored what the villages had put forward, or they certainly had in Reach's case.
Yeah, I think the whole process was flawed. Fundamentally, the council hasn't even got its own strategic planning officers anymore. So you look at how critical a local plan is to how an area develops. As we just discussed, the East Cambs is buying in officer time from Peterborough. So we've got officers who work out of Peterborough, who are spending some time in East Cambs as part of plenty of other responsibilities to create the local plan, rather than having that activity happening within East Cambridgeshire, within the council offices. And we don't have at the same time. So we talked about the area committees. We don't have any committee at the council that's really looking at that strategic development as to how East Cambridgeshire will develop. So it's getting that, both the councillors looking at that, not just the local level and consulting, but also looking more strategically about how East Cambridgeshire develops, but also having the officers there and part of the East Cambridgeshire Council to pull that all together.